It is not every day that a trade dispute begins with a threat to buy an entire country. Yet here we are. The United States, under President Donald Trump, has announced sweeping new tariffs on 8 of its closest allies, nations that together form the backbone of the Transatlantic alliance, because they sent small military units to Greenland for a joint Arctic exercise. The president's demand is clear. He wants to purchase Greenland, and he is now using economic coercion to pressure Denmark and its European partners into acquiescing. This is not a hypothetical scenario from a geopolitical thriller. It is unfolding right now, with real consequences for global trade, NATO cohesion, and the very principle of national sovereignty. I'm Hillary Milton. I've spent decades covering how policy decisions move from paper into real life. And tonight, that gap is exactly where this story lives. From my reporting desk in Washington, we're tracking a crisis that began with a long-standing American interest in a remote Arctic island, but has now escalated into a direct challenge to the post-war international order. What happens next will affect not just the price of goods on store shelves, but the stability of alliances that have kept the peace for over 70 years. Greenland is the world's largest island, a vast ice-covered territory with a population of just under 57,000 people. It is not an independent nation, but a self-governing part of the Kingdom of Denmark, a relationship that dates back centuries and was formally codified in the Danish Constitution of 1953. While Greenland manages its own domestic affairs, including healthcare, education, and natural resources, foreign policy and defense remain under Copenhagen's authority. Crucially, because Denmark is a founding member of NATO, Greenland is covered by the alliance's Article 5 Collective Defense Clause. That means an attack on Greenland is, by treaty, an attack on all NATO members, including the United States. This arrangement has served U.S. strategic interests for decades. Under a 1951 defense agreement between Washington and Copenhagen, the United States maintains Pitufik Space Base, formerly known as Thule Air Base, in northern Greenland. This installation is one of America's most critical northern outposts, housing early warning radar systems, satellite tracking facilities, and space surveillance assets. The 1951 agreement granted the U.S. extensive rights to operate military infrastructure on the island, far beyond what was typical during the Cold War. At its peak, Thule hosted over 10,000 American personnel. Today, that number has dwindled to around 150, but the base's strategic value has only grown as climate change opens new Arctic shipping lanes and as Russia and China increase their presence in the region. President Trump first floated the idea of purchasing Greenland during his first term in 2019. At the time, it was widely dismissed as an offhand remark, a quirk of his transactional worldview. But since returning to office, his administration has treated the acquisition as a serious policy objective. In recent months, senior officials, including Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, have held multiple meetings with Danish and Greenlandic representatives to explore the possibility. Those talks, however, have consistently failed. Greenlandic leaders have been unequivocal. They do not wish to become part of the United States. Greenland belongs to the Greenlandic people, read banners at a protest in Nuuk this past weekend, where nearly a third of the capital's population turned out to demonstrate against the U.S. proposal. Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen described a meeting with Vance and Rubio last week as constructive, suggesting that diplomatic channels were open. But that perception was shattered on Saturday, when President Trump announced that a 10% tariff would be imposed on all goods imported from Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland, effective February 1st, 2026. That rate, he said, would jump to 25% on June 1st if the U.S. is not able to purchase Greenland. The justification? These nations had participated in a pre-coordinated, routine NATO exercise in Greenland, sending small contingents of troops to train alongside Danish forces. To the White House, this was not a demonstration of alliance solidarity. It was an act of defiance. Here's what's often missed in the headlines. These deployments were not provocative. They were planned months in advance as part of Denmark's broader effort to bolster Arctic security. In fact, Copenhagen has gone to great lengths to reassure Washington. Last year, the Danish government unveiled a $6.5 billion Arctic defense package, the largest in its modern history, aimed at enhancing surveillance, naval patrols, and rapid response capabilities in Greenland and the surrounding waters. This investment was a direct response to repeated U.S. criticism that Denmark was not doing enough to protect the island from potential foreign interference, particularly from Russia and China. The Danish government even expressed willingness to expand the American footprint at Pituffik, offering to host more U.S. personnel and equipment under the existing 1951 framework. And yet, none of this has satisfied the current administration. Instead of building on these cooperative gestures, the White House has chosen confrontation. A senior official recently told reporters that the military is always an option if diplomatic or economic pressure fails to secure Greenland, a statement that sent shockwaves through European capitals. Such rhetoric is unprecedented among NATO allies. It blurs the line between partnership and coercion, and it raises a fundamental question. If the United States is willing to threaten tariffs, or worse, against its closest friends over a piece of sovereign territory, what does that mean for the future of the alliance? European leaders have responded with remarkable unity. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen stated plainly that Europe will remain united, coordinated, and committed to upholding its sovereignty. French President Emmanuel Macron called the tariff threats unacceptable and vowed that no intimidation nor threat will influence us. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer emphasized that applying tariffs on allies for participating in NATO exercises is completely wrong. Even more pointedly, EU Foreign Affairs Chief Kaja Kallas warned that the real winners of this transatlantic rift are Moscow and Beijing. China and Russia must be having a field day, she wrote. They are the ones who benefit from divisions among allies. This is where the policy meets reality. Tariffs are not abstract economic tools. They are taxes on consumers and businesses. A 10% duty on European imports would immediately raise prices on a wide range of goods in the U.S., from German automobiles and French wine to Swedish furniture and Dutch dairy products. If the rate climbs to 25%, the impact would be even more severe, potentially triggering retaliatory measures from Europe and igniting a full-blown trade war. Economists at major institutions like the Peterson Institute for International Economics have long warned that such conflicts reduce growth, stoke inflation, and hurt workers on both sides of the Atlantic. And for what? To acquire a territory whose people have repeatedly said they do not want to be acquired. The data tells a different story than the one being told in the White House. Greenland is rich in rare earth minerals, elements essential for electric vehicles, wind turbines, and advanced electronics. China currently dominates the global supply chain for these materials, controlling over 60% of mining and nearly 90% of refining capacity. U.S. strategists have rightly identified this as a vulnerability, but the solution does not require ownership of Greenland. Under its self-governing status, Greenland has the authority to negotiate its own resource deals. In fact, several Western companies, including Australian and Canadian firms, are already exploring mining opportunities there, with the full support of the Greenlandic government. The path to securing critical minerals lies in partnership. That's the consequence most people don't see. By framing this as a real estate transaction, the administration is ignoring the complex political and legal realities on the ground. Greenland has its own parliament, its own prime minister, and a strong sense of national identity. In a 2023 referendum, over 70% of Greenlanders said they supported eventual independence from Denmark. But that aspiration is rooted in self-determination, not a desire to trade one colonial power for another. The protests in Nuuk this weekend were not just about rejecting Trump. They were about affirming that the future of Greenland must be decided by Greenlanders themselves. Meanwhile, bipartisan voices in Congress are pushing back. A delegation of U.S. senators and representatives, including Democrat Jeanne Shaheen and Republican Tom Tillis, visited Greenland last week and returned with a clear message. There is no need or desire for a costly acquisition or hostile military takeover of Greenland. When our Danish and Greenlandic allies are eager to work with us on Arctic security, critical minerals, and other priorities under the framework of long-standing treaties. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has announced plans to introduce legislation that would block any tariffs imposed for the purpose of coercing a territorial transfer, a move that could set up a constitutional showdown between the executive and legislative branches. In plain terms, this is a test of whether the United States still operates within the rules-based order it helped create. For decades, American foreign policy has been anchored in the principles of sovereignty, non-aggression, and multilateral cooperation. Even during periods of intense rivalry, such as the Cold War, Washington respected the territorial integrity of its allies. Now, that norm is being challenged, not by an adversary, but by the leader of the free world himself. The timeline of this crisis is accelerating. February 1st is less than 2 weeks away. On that date, the first wave of tariffs is scheduled to take effect. If they are implemented, European leaders have signaled they will respond in kind, potentially targeting politically sensitive U.S. exports, like agricultural goods and bourbon whiskey. By June 1st, if no deal is struck, the economic damage could be far more severe. But the deeper damage may be diplomatic. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. NATO's strength has always been its unity, the certainty that an attack on one is an attack on all. When one member begins threatening others with economic punishment over a peaceful military exercise, that certainty erodes. This situation also distracts from more urgent priorities. As Kaja Kallas noted, Europe and the United States are in the midst of supporting Ukraine against Russia's full-scale invasion. Every hour spent negotiating over Greenland is an hour not spent coordinating arms shipments, financial aid, or diplomatic strategy. At a time when authoritarian powers are testing the resolve of democracies, internal division is the greatest vulnerability of all. Looking ahead, there are several possible paths. One is de-escalation. The White House could walk back its threats, accept Denmark's offer of enhanced cooperation at Pitufik, and focus on joint ventures for critical mineral development. This would preserve the alliance and achieve the administration's strategic goals without resorting to coercion. Another path is escalation. Tariffs go into effect, Europe retaliates, and the transatlantic relationship enters a prolonged period of strain. In the worst-case scenario, the rhetoric continues to intensify, raising the specter of military posturing that could destabilize the entire Arctic region. But there is a third, quieter possibility, one that centers on Greenland itself. The island's leaders have made it clear they want a seat at the table. They are not pawns to be traded between great powers. They are a people with legitimate aspirations and concerns. Any lasting solution must include them as equal partners. That means respecting their autonomy, investing in their economy, and working with them to ensure that the Arctic remains a zone of peace, not competition. As this story unfolds, we must ask ourselves, what kind of leadership do we want on the world stage? One that respects the sovereignty of others, even when it's inconvenient? Or one that treats international relations as a series of transactions where might makes right? The answer will shape not just the fate of Greenland, but the future of American credibility for generations to come. What do you believe is the right course forward for the United States in Greenland? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you'd like to see more in-depth, fact-based reporting on the stories that matter, please consider subscribing to this channel. I'm Hillary Milton, and this story is far from over.